my dear friends, this is another video in the Clash After Years series. The Huawei P30 Pro can already be called a legendary smartphone, and for its time it was a real revolution. After the Google ban, many people gave up buying new devices from this brand. Although of course Huawei keeps coming up with new solutions to bypass the Google ban, many users still choose not to buy flagship devices from Huawei. And here comes Honor, or actually Honor made a big entrance last year with the Magic 6 Pro. Last year it didn't occur to me to make such a comparison, but this year I didn't make the same mistake. A similar, almost identical Android skin, a similar camera interface, and 6 years in between. Of course, in almost every aspect, such as performance, screen and biometrics, the Honor Magic 7 Pro will crush the Huawei P30 Pro. But what about the camera? Let's find out in this video. We will start with a few details, but to keep the video short, the camera specs are on the screen in front of you, and we will move straight to the photos. Looking at the photos from the main camera on both phones, it's hard to believe there is a 6-year gap between them. The photos from both smartphones are really good. They are not over-sharpened, but they could be a bit softer for the typical soft photography look. What stands out in some places is the color difference, especially with green or the sky. Of course, which colors you prefer depends on your personal taste. The Honor offers 3 color modes, which give us some flexibility in choosing how the colors are represented based on our needs. Personally, I use the natural mode because it seems to reflect reality the best. On the Huawei, there are additional filters available, but they have a stronger impact on the whole photo, not just the color. It's also worth noting that when switching between lenses on the Huawei, the colors change quite a bit. On the Honor, the colors transitions between lenses are more even. When it comes to details, I was quite surprised, because there is either not much of a difference when zooming in, or it's actually the Huawei that shows more details despite the smaller sensor. The Huawei's aperture is 1.6, and combined with the good optimization, it gives really great results. The Honor has a variable aperture between 1.4 and 2.0, but you can also use the automatic mode. In worse light conditions, you can notice an even bigger difference in details. In those conditions, the Huawei often captures more detail and the photos are softer compared to the Honor. The wide-angle lens surprised me. Of course, at first glance, it's clear that the Honor has a wider field of view, but in terms of the photo quality, there aren't drastic differences. When switching from 1x to wide, you will notice color changes more often on the Huawei than on the Honor. Overall, the wide-angle photos on the Huawei are not drastically worse than those on the Honor. The processing is different. Huawei sharpens the photos more, while Honor smooths them out, which is especially noticeable when zooming in. This is another example showing how little attention producers pay to wide-angle lenses over the years. And now let's talk about the telephoto lens. On paper, the differences is huge. I'm talking about the sensor size and megapixels. The Honor should crush the Huawei. And it does in many situations, but in good lighting conditions, the 5x zoom on the Huawei still holds up. but not in every situation, especially when photographing tricky subjects like animals, where there are a lot of detail. In worse lighting, the Honor beats the Huawei, but I also took some photos where the Huawei really surprised me. I expected much worse results than I actually got. A downside is that when switching to the telephoto lens, on the Huawei you immediately see a color change. On the one hand, there is a downside, but on the other hand, it clearly shows whether the photo is coming from the telephoto lens or if the phone is just cropping from the main sensor. Another issue is the focus distance on the Huawei's telephoto lens, which is pretty long, about 2 meters, so you need to know that almost every close-up photos will be cropped from the main sensor. The Honor focuses at about 20-25 centimeters, which is a big advantage, allowing you to take close-up photos using the telephoto lens, which is great for that purpose. And now let's talk about zoom. The Honor can zoom up to 100x, while the Huawei goes up to 50x, which is quite impressive, especially considering that even today some phones only zoom up to 25x. And up to 10x in good lighting conditions, the Huawei zoom looks pretty decent, but above 10x you start losing details, and at the higher zoom levels the photos get blurry and sometimes even looks painted. In lower light conditions, even at 10x, the images can look worse at night, and even the 5x telephoto can look weak. The Honor does really well up to 10x, but above you begin to see a drop in detail. From 30x, the super zoom AI kicks in, and the results vary, sometimes better, sometimes worse. But it's definitely better than in Huawei. The differences in time is quite visible here. When it comes to portraits, the Honor clearly wins in almost every condition, both in terms of skin tones and background separation. But I have to admit that while the Honor does a great job separating, for example, hair from the background, the details on the face could be better and the face could look more natural. Fortunately, we have extra color filters like Hardcore Intense, Colorful and Classic that gives cool effects. I really like using these filters for portrait shots on the Honor. On the front camera, the Honor wins. Colors are more vibrant and face doesn't look as pale as it does in the photos from the Huawei. In the Honor, it's worth turning off the face smoothing effects to make your face look more natural. The Honor also lets you change the angle from the 0.8 to 1x before taking photo. But considering the Huawei P30 Pro is a 6-year-old smartphone, it still performs pretty well. When it comes to macro shots, I have to admit that Huawei P30 Pro still does really well, even now for such an old smartphone. Both phones have a macro mode, and in many cases the shots are quite comparable. But Honor has the lead. It allows you to get a little closer to the object, but remember, this is standard macro, not one that uses the telephoto lens for macro shots. In night shots, there is a noticeable difference, both in terms of colors and, for example, white balance. The Honor has automatic night mode, which turns on rather invisibly. The Honor shows reflections from lamp as a star-shaped flares, which looks interesting on one hand, but can sometimes look unnatural when there are multiple lights in the frame. The photos from the Honor can be a bit inconsistent. They can turn out perfectly or sometimes just too dark. The amount of detail also varies. On the Huawei, depending on the shot and amount of light in the frame, you can use either the regular photo or night mode. However, this night mode on the Huawei is quite specific. It takes longer exposures, which often results in overexposed photo. Of course, this has its pros and cons, the pros being that it can bring out more detail, but the downside is that the photo doesn't always look natural. There is an option to shorten that exposure, which also reduces the overexposure, but you have to get the timing right to get a good photo, as it requires pressing the shutter at the right moment. So the night shots on the Huawei can be a bit inconsistent. In general, if the scene is well lit, you don't always need to night mode on the Huawei. It all depends on how much light is in the frame when taking the photo, and if you are using the night mode, it depends on your judgment of when to stop the exposure to get the right brightness for the shot. Now, photos in motion. The Honor has an action mode and the Super HD burst mode, while the Huawei doesn't have a dedicated action mode. In good lighting conditions, both the One X and telephoto lenses on the Huawei performs quite well. The Honor is excellent. It's hardly even take blurry photos in those conditions. In worse lighting, especially in artificial light, the Honor performs much better than the Huawei. While the One X photos on the Huawei can still hold up, most of the telephoto shots are just blurry. Here there is no competition. But honestly, I expected worse results from the 6-year-old smartphone. The biggest time difference is in the video. The Honor can record up to 4K at 60 FPS, and it also supports HDR mode. Plus, in Pro mode, you can use a logarithmic profile, which can be important for people working in color correction. On the Huawei, we can only record in 4K at 30 FPS, and there is a 10-minute recording limit. With the Honor, you can switch between lenses while recording, but you can't do that on Huawei. You have a slider that's much less comfortable to use, and it's pretty annoying when zooming in or out. The differences in recording quality is big, especially in terms of stabilization. The 6 years gap is very noticeable here. Slider. Okay, we are in 1x, and now 2.6x in Honor, and tele in the Huawei is 5x. Oh my god. Okay. We are in 5x, and you can see that because the colors changing a little. Okay, so there is 5x in Huawei, and now we go to 5x in Honor. Okay, we are in 5x, like that. And now the max zoom in Honor is 10x, and in Huawei is 15x. That. Okay. We back to 1x. Okay. And now running. front-facing camera on both smartphones. In case of Huawei, we have only Full HD, 30 FPS, and here and in Honor we can pause, we can take photo, and in Honor we can change the angle. Now towards sun is not strong, but you can see the difference. And now running. When we think about the 6 years since the Huawei P30 Pro launched in March 2019, it seems that the difference in the camera should be massive. Of course, it's hard to imagine that P30 Pro is beating the Honor in every aspect because it lags behind in, for example, a video, portraits, front camera, but the photos from the main camera, which most of us use every day, still holds up quite well. The camera in the Huawei P30 Pro was a revolution for its time, something that's still hard to find today. Even though I now use one of the best photography smartphones of 2024, the Vivo X100 Ultra, and that might change this year, of course, I'm not surprised that P30 Pro is still with me and I haven't sold it. It's a piece of history and I still have a lot of sentiment for this phone. Thank you very much for this video. I encourage you to subscribe this channel, leave a comment if you want to, and we will see in the next videos. Bye.